Nicholas, let's talk about Los Últimos Frikis.
Los Frikis, let's talk.
So what inspired you to do this? Because you did initiate with the short film.
Yeah.
Hard Rock,
So
right?
Exactly. So this project started, it feels like a century ago, about 10 years ago, when I made my first trip to Cuba as a film student. I went and had the opportunity to spend 3 months in Cuba as an American film student from New York, and discovered this heavy metal band, encountered this heavy metal band called Zeus. And I grew up playing drums. I'm still a drummer, and grew up very much what would be considered a freaky, a punk kid. And, I went to my first Zeus concert at the Maxim Rock in Havana, and very much felt just sort of transformed and like transported back to going to concerts at the State Theater in Portland, Maine, where I grew up. But then also sort of realized there's something a little different here. You see, Ministry of Interior guys around the edges of the venue. You see sort of Che Guevara tattoos, and you say, what does it mean to play rock and roll here? What's the story with this band? And that began a 10-year sort of journey to understand and to share and to tell the story of this band with everybody.
And how did the subjects feel about you documenting their life as musicians?
I think, there's the frustration was always that they hadn't, this band is legendary in Cuba. It's the most popular metal band, and it's huge. We were in the far reaches of the country in Guantanamo, and they had fans that knew all their songs and loved them. But the band was always frustrated that they hadn't been able to really be heard outside the country, and also at the same time they didn't feel like they'd quite gotten the respect that they felt that they deserved within Cuba itself. So I think, well, Dione would say it's, and he did tell me this, the lead singer Dione, at the very end, after all these years of asking him questions and talking and sharing, I asked him the classic question, is there anything else you wanted to share after all these years? And he says, well, Nick, I just wanted to say that it makes me sad that it had to be an outsider who came and saw us for who we are, and could tell our story. And so I think they saw this opportunity and the work and the time that I put in, and also that our whole team put in, as a really wonderful opportunity, but also in a way kind of melancholy for them that they still felt like there was an opportunity to have their story told and understood within Cuba, that I think they're still waiting for, and hopefully this film is a positive part of helping to make that happen.
Do you think it would be possible for them to go, after this film, be heard and maybe go somewhere international?
I hope so. It's just, we had all these hopes and dreams, as everybody did, back in, February or March of last year. And obviously everything has just been quite slammed shut in Cuba. I saw they just announced that they're going to start reopening the airport and start, reopening travel again. But Cuba's been a very hard country to get into because of COVID for the past many months, almost a year. And music festivals are still in a big question mark of what those look like. So we very much had hoped, and we still do hope, that there's an opportunity for the band to travel and to play. In the meantime, they have done some very fun. Last summer, they did a really fun live stream show. So I think hopefully, and then through the film, we can, this is a digital release, so everyone can safely watch from their own sort of pandemic bubbles. Mm-hmm. And so the band will be playing around the world, certainly through the film, and definitely we would hope maybe next year to be able to continue sharing, and for the band to be back on the road. But at the moment, obviously, the sort of release hopes and dreams have been turned into slightly more of a digital form for now.
So there is a little bit of hope, putting aside the pandemic, right?
I think so. I think you got to have hope.
Yes.
The guys are really good. the drummer is one of my favorite drummers. Amazing, plays with such power and such energy. His name is Longa, Eduardo Longa, and Hansel Orocha, the guitarist, is a phenomenal world-class musician. So it's a lot of talent in the band and on the island. I think the thing that's been really special about this project, and one of many things that's very special about the project, is the way that you build a community around a film. You know, a film isn't just me. It's a community of people involved. And I think one of the people in that community that's been really special is Dave Lombardo, who's the founding drummer of Slayer, and I'm sure has played the Whiskey a number of times. And you know, he's born in Cuba and has his own incredibly special relationship with the country, having had to flee when he was less than 2 years old. It really sort of Lombardo sees the band in a way as like the story his life would have followed if he hadn't left. So when he sees Eduardo Longa, the amazing drummer of Zeus, in a way he sort of sees a sort of flip side of what his own story could have been. So, you know, there's definitely a connection between LA and Havana that we'd love to bring the band together in that way.
Well, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about the film? And I know, like, Hansel was kind of like, I'm not going to talk about politics, but there was a forbidden truth mentioned. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that made the film quite challenging to make is that it was a film for an audience that isn't in Cuba. You know, as a foreigner, as an American, I was clearly telling a story from my perspective and for an audience beyond the island. I think ideally this film, and hopefully it very much has resonated with people in Cuba, but it's also a story and a film for others to draw inspiration from and to hear the band's music and to extend the story. So I think the challenge throughout the storytelling of the film and the structuring, the editing and filming was how to tell an outside audience that doesn't know, you know, what the language in Cuba means. You know, even in Spanish, you say one thing, but actually you're saying all these other things. And that takes, there's a lot to ask of subtitles. You know, it's even a lot to ask, even if you speak the language, but still might not understand everything that's actually being said. So I think finding and striking that balance with the band in a way that they're not looking to sort of tear down a system. They're not a dissident band. They just love to rock, and that's their story, and that's what their life is just doing what they love and playing their music in Cuba. So finding a way that told the story and gave the context for what makes the band and their struggle and the sort of what makes Frikis so special in Cuba, what they've had to fight against, and what it really means to embrace this loud and beautiful music. You see that in the film, and this is when I say, well, what's a forbidden truth? I say, like, well, you know, you should really watch the film to understand it, because I think ultimately over the course of the film, you sort of understand what the band is saying. And as Hansel says when he confronts me in that scene where I'm asking him, you know, well, so what does it mean? What do you sing about? You know, you sing about hard stuff. What does that mean? He says, well, Nick, you know, we can't talk about that, but we can sing about it. And I think that's the way, ultimately, I hope for the way the film works, but certainly the way that Cuban art and the band's music works, which is to say things in a more poetic and artful way, and not so direct, I guess, is the way that the band has found to dance, and ultimately the way the film evolves and shifts as the story progresses.
That's a scene I was going to ask you about, because there's two scenes where they ask to stop filming. I guess they're just not comfortable. And what made you keep those two scenes?
I think it's important in the sort of transparency of the project to understand also the lens that I was taking, and the fact that there was, you know, there's this guy named Nick who's making this damn film. And I think that is a helpful framing for people to understand that everything that they're seeing on screen is also in a way a conversation. That there's certain things that the band isn't willing to talk about. And I think leaving that out is doing a disservice to the audience, but also in a way doing a disservice to the band, to show that they're, the way that they, the sort of terms and the sort of lived experience of what it meant to have a crew in their life.
I found that pretty interesting, and I kind of found that very organic.
Yeah.
So that was great.
I love my favorite. We showed the band the film during the production twice as we were refining it. And first it was an early rough cut, and opened up a whole lot of doors for us as the band saw what the final film was going to be like, and ended up, one of those scenes where one of those moments where you're filming with your main subject, beautiful interviews we've been trying to get for a while, and then being like, man, there's another year worth of work ahead, just thinking you're so close. And then but I obviously was asked, I asked Hansel, like, hey, what do you think of this scene? Are you guys comfortable with me including that? Not that I was giving the band permission to sort of have final cut on the project, but I did think that if there was something the band was not comfortable with, I wanted to know that and make a deliberate choice to include it or not include it. But I wanted to do it in a way that I was going in with full, making the choice with full information. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the Hansel was like, no, that scene's great. I do fine. You look like an idiot. And you look like an asshole, but that's on you. But I always thought that was a pretty good a semblance of how Hansel felt about that moment.
Now we talk about the Oni, you mentioned him, and he mentions that he was in jail for 6 years. But it doesn't really specify to why he was in jail. Was that he asked to not reveal?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things Joni doesn't really talk a lot about. And in the film, what we do in the film is address the timeline of when and how it happened, but sort of the root causes and like what led him to be arrested are a little more delicate and complicated for him to explain, and so he doesn't really address that on camera.
Mm-hmm. And now someone mentions in the film that their music was seen as accepting the influence of the capitalist world.
Yeah.
Their music.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really the starting point of what it meant to be, not what it meant to be a rocker, but what the system, the sort of the communist or broader mainstream Cuban the power center and the Communist Party would see what they saw these rock and roll kids as. They didn't see them as like, oh, cool, rebellious kids who have some independent thoughts and they like this music that's different. The sort of official government, the government in Cuba saw rock and roll as a threat, as some subversive, problematic thing. You got these crazy kids running around in blue jeans. We must crush them. And I think that was something that was true throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I think what you hear, I think the drummer Longa tells us about that. But basically, like there would be these house parties where you would be in the 80s, 70s, and 80s where you'd be playing the Beatles or Rolling Stones or Black Sabbath, and the state police would come in and say, oh, you can't listen to this American crap, and they would break your Rolling Stones record or break your Beatles record and be like, hey, oye, pero grupo de Inglaterra. It's a British band, not an American band. So that was very much what rock and roll represented, was this outside force, particularly in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and into the 90s.
That just kind of reminds her of appreciative that we can listen to anything we want here in the States, right? That freedom.
Exactly, yeah.
Appreciating the little things. Mm-hmm. Well, Nicholas, thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure people are going to be enjoying this film and getting an idea of, how music and politics kind of intertwines when you wouldn't anticipate it. And in a country when in Cuba, you wouldn't think it would have had gone its limitations to that extent. I didn't know.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it's the universal story of, you know, wanting to rock and roll, wanting to express yourself. And I think that's true, you know, in Portland, Maine, where I grew up, and it's true in downtown Havana, where the band grew up. And I think, you know, we tell a very specifically Cuba story, but I think there's a lot for people to connect with in a broader sense. And I feel like how to, you know, fight for what you want, and fight for your own voice. And I think the band has done that for 30 years in a really impressive way.
Well, they are definitely survivors.
Yeah, that's very true.
Thank you so much for your time again.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.